coming to you live from a bedroom in the house that I rent. Anyway, uh, I wanted to tackle three, and as you'll notice on the title of the episode, three unpopular truisms that don't get talked about today anymore. Uh, Very sadly, even on the conservative side, there's with these kind of new conservative faces relatively new conservative faces that we see kind of spreading over social media and the YouTube channels. These are three truisms that they either don't talk about or they try to bury or they just deny flat out. Um, and who I'm referring to basically is that general group of young conservatives that have really sprung up recently, relatively recently, on YouTube, like and social media. Like Charlie Kirk would be one, Candace Owens, Ben Shapiro to an extent. The guys at the Daily Wire, even though I like some of them, I listen to Michael Knowles quite a bit. I have a lot of issues with Matt Walsh, so I don't really listen to him that much. And Ben Shapiro, I can take Ben Shapiro or leave him. But I tend to disagree with him on things here and there, and then it just kind of built up over time to where I just don't listen to him much anymore. And Candace Owens, I've my personal opinion of her has just sort of like it plummeted early on, and then it just stayed down in the gutter, mostly because of her personality. Since I'm on social media, I can see kind of her interaction with other conservatives on there, and some of the spats that she has are just so vitriolic and so mean-spirited and spiteful. The way she talks, just this really condescending, arrogant attitude that she has when she gets into arguments with other conservatives. She's been in constant debate fights, like these childish squabbles with Tommy Lahren on Twitter. And Blair White, who's a transgender conservative YouTuber, they had a debate on Dave Rubin's podcast, which it was like it literally. I'm not saying this to be mean, like listening to two fifth graders argue about who the like a boy passed a note back and who was it really meant for. Like and really like I expected them to start pulling each other's hair any second. Like it was that childish, just ad hominem attacks, no logical coherence. It was all personal spite, and just what came out of it was my impression of Candace Owens as just a very arrogant, spiteful, mean-spirited person who thinks so highly of herself, and really has contempt for anyone who disagrees with her. So I don't have a high opinion of her, and I even besides that, I do lump her in with this category I'm about to broadly speak about in the younger faces in conservatism. And first off, I've read a number of articles and watched some YouTube sort of exposés here recently on the newer conservative movement that's kind of been cropping up. These social media celebrity figures that you see, like again Charlie Kirk and Candace Owens and some of the other ones, the Ben Shapiro's. And what I find troubling, and there are those who out there who I always hit this camera. There are those out there who may be listening, who might stumble across this video I'm making here and be fans of theirs and, really quibble with some of the things that I'm saying. But I find it just very odd that as conservative figures out there, who I would brand as more true conservatives, are being taken off social media and banned and just censored and their careers destroyed. I don't like Alex Jones, but look what happened to Alex Jones. Somebody who really stuck to his guns and said and spoke his mind no matter what. Was unafraid of confronting the progressive left and championing the values that are much more conservative than you would actually think, considering his bombastic persona. Milo Yiannopoulos is another example whose message, if you actually read it, is far more conservative than you would actually think, given his flamboyant persona. Both men have had their careers completely annihilated, and the conservative movement as a whole has done very little to support either one of those beyond the token podcast episode where people like Candace Owens and Charlie Kirk will spout on and on about free speech. But what have they actually done? What sort of protests have they made, or what kind of action have they taken to actually try to bring Alex Jones back or Milo Yiannopoulos? Or you don't see that. You don't see action. You just see lip service paid to this idea. How ironic that they pay lip service to free speech and yet do nothing. Ben Shapiro too. I've had issue with him on, or taken issue with him on this very thing. Is he'll talk about free speech, but then when he's discussing certain people who are being demolished by the mainstream media and their livelihoods destroyed, he'll say, "Oh, this is contemptible." But I've also heard him be extremely flippant and nonchalant and almost condescending towards certain people who are under the thumb of the establishment, like Tommy Robinson, for example. Instead of defending Tommy Robinson outright, Ben Shapiro actually took the time to call him basically a lunatic and a fringe actor, and just kind of denigrate the guy. And it was very condescending towards him. When really, if the point is to defend free speech, then why the attack on issues that you may not agree with Tommy Robinson on? So it's this, he pays lip service to the idea, but when it comes to actually standing up for people who are having their free speech taken away, like Milo, like Alex Jones, like Tommy Robinson, you see these conservatives do nothing. I've seen them do nothing. Now, I mean, there again, some fans of theirs out there will obviously contradict this and say they've done this, this, and this. And if they truly have, then I stand corrected. But I know of no action taken by. And on top of this, why is it that the people that actually speak their mind and stick to their guns are the ones that are getting destroyed, but then supposed free speech activists and people like Shapiro and Charlie Kirk and Candace Owens, who constantly are free speech, society, free speech. Dave Rubin is another one. And yet they're not being silenced at all. And when I get to these 3 points here, which I'm going to right now, just cut to the chase, I think it kind of will give a clearer picture as to why they have been largely unharmed by the progressive left's attempts to silence people. I mean, Ben Shapiro gets death threats. Yes, I'm not minimizing that. We know this. But by and large, I mean, who's trying to censor the Daily Wire right now? I don't know of any. Their videos may be demonetized every once in a while, but given the extent to which conservatives have been wiped off and are being purged from social media, given that context, the Daily Wire has largely been left alone. Nobody persecutes Matt Walsh, largely speaking, or Ben Shapiro, broadly speaking, or Michael Knowles, broadly speaking. That's not to say things haven't happened to them or they haven't had threats. All conservatives have, okay? But broadly speaking, they are standing erect when everybody else is being pummeled to the ground. The same goes for Charlie Kirk and Candace Owens and some of the others, the Tommy Lahrens and all those people out there. These big, pretty faces, these celebrity names that are worshipped on social media. But when you actually listen to what they're saying, they don't have they're not really embracing true conservatism. They talk constantly about Judeo-Christian values and the like, which is good. But let's take it a step further. What I like to do is actually get to the very root, the origin, the heart of the matter. And the heart of the matter of conservative is Christianity. It's not Judeo-Christian values, it's Christianity. If you're going to talk about Judeo-Christian values, don't call yourself a conservative, because you're not. What you are is a social liberal, like Dave Rubin. That's social liberalism, the belief in free speech, the idea that you can live your way and I'll live mine, and as long as we're not harming each other, we can live in harmony. That's the basic right to live peacefully and not to be impinged upon by a government, and all. That's basically social liberalism, mixed in with a little bit of libertarianism. That's not conservatism. Conservatism is actually rooted in actual morals, and that gets largely ignored. Now we talk about Judeo-Christian values, yes, but what are the values that are being compromised on? When you listen to like Charlie Kirk and some of the others, who claim the name of Christ and claim to be a champion for conservatism, I would challenge that. I think largely he's not a champion of conservatism at all. What he is a social liberal and a libertarian, and those are very different things. I used to think that libertarianism was closely aligned with conservatism, and I used to call myself ignorantly a libertarian. By and large, I don't think I am anymore. You need the social fabric of conservatism to hold the country together. Pure libertarianism is more akin to anarchy than anything else. By and large, I think it is. That's where it's headed. That's the logical direction of it. And so, if you don't have the moral values of Christianity, libertarianism would just it would spell the doom of the country. There's a quote that's often been attributed to multiple different people, but it goes like this: America is great because it is good. If it ceases to be good, so also will it cease to be great. So if you don't have Christianity, not just vague Judeo-Christian values that we can all kind of, oh yeah, espouse, but not really believe in, then the fabric of society, there will be nothing to hold it together, and you can be as libertarian as you want, the society will collapse. But anyway, here's three things. First off, I'm categorizing this under like three truisms that are unpopular, because nobody wants to hear about or have stones thrown at their social media idols in the conservative. They're going to demonize me because how dare you criticize Charlie Kirk? Look at all the good things he's done. Well, by and large, I don't think he's done a whole lot of good things. But anyway, number one, and this is, broadly speaking of a lot of these big, pretty-faced conservative names, conservatives who talk about, quote, faith and a generic sort of God. And as I said before, those kind of people are more social liberals rather than conservatives. First off, on faith, most of these people, like Charlie Kirk, when they talk about faith, and this is also broadly applies to, or I should say has infected a lot of the Christian church. It's this concept of faith as a very personal thing. That's not to say faith is not personal. It is intensely personal, but that's not where it stops. Faith is actually a living out of something you believe. Biblical faith is actually more akin to trust. You have faith in a chair that you're going to sit in. You trust the stability of the chair to hold you up. That's kind of, and that's why we talk about faith increasing through sanctification as you live your Christian life, because you learn to trust God more and more as you see Him working in your life, supporting you, basically taking care of your daily needs. Give us this day our daily bread. That's where that comes from in the Lord's Prayer. But the problem with a lot of the church, and the more contemporary church, and this is maybe bled into the church from the conservative movement and the conservative faith of people like Charlie Kirk and Candace Owens and some of these others who, when they talk about faith, they're talking about this very intensely private thing that is not lived out in the culture. It's not lived out in a way that would in any way challenge the belief system of your neighbor, say, or it would not be lived out in a way that would affect or change culture. So it's basically the very relativistic view on faith or morals or values that I believe this. This is my faith, but I don't dare say that what I believe is better or more true than what you believe. Your faith is your faith. You're a Muslim, okay? Well, that's your faith. This is my faith. I'm a Christian, and we'll just kind of live out our faith in harmony together. Not that I'm saying we shouldn't live peaceably, but look, the final brutal reality is that nobody that's a true Muslim actually believes that. Okay, if you read the Quran, and I admit I haven't read the entire Quran, but I've read parts of it, and I've listened to Muslim scholars talk on this. True Muslim scholars will not say that you just live your faith in an intensely personal, private way in which you do not try to affect and change the culture around you. Okay, look into the Middle East at these genuine Muslim countries, Islamic countries, and tell me that that's what they're doing. These are just people just, timidly living out their faith in the privacy of their own home, not trying to affect any kind of change in the culture around them. No, the Islamist is intensely driven to change the world for Islam. And that includes putting to submission any other belief or ideology that conflicts with it, or religion. Now, Christianity obviously is not supposed to be spread at the edge of a sword, or at the end of a sword or a spear or anything like that. We would condemn the Crusades. And Jesus talked nothing about forcing people to come to him for salvation. He commands it as the Lord God of the universe, but that's entirely different than sinful, finite people commanding somebody else to repent. We can only share the good news. But the difference between what Charlie Kirk's version of faith is, or not to just constantly wrangle on Charlie Kirk, but this idea that has infected the church, the contemporary church, and conservatism, that faith is just this private, timid thing that we live out in the privacy of our home, but when we go out into public, that's where it ends. That's where we put it on hold. We hit the pause button on it. This is the poisonous idea that liberals and secularists have tried to sell the church based off of a misinterpretation of what the separation of church and state means. The separation of church and state was never intended to remove the church from public life, or to remove the church or Christianity from affecting or having making change in the culture or in politics or in any other avenue of life. That is not what it was intended, and I don't have time to go into that right now, but look into it. Read about the Treaty of Tripoli, if that's how it's pronounced. I believe the president at the time was John Adams. Read his journal entries and his quotes and what he had to say about that treaty that he had his ambassador sign. Read the quotes and the letters and the journal entries from the ambassador. I forget his name right now. I'd have to go and look it up. These people were not doing this to permanently separate church and state so that the church could never affect or have any sort of impact on the culture or politics. That was not the intent of it. And also, if you go to Scripture, the idea that faith is just this timid little thing, there I go hitting the camera again, is not supported by Scripture either, which is supposed to be our foundation, are supposed to be where we get our whole idea of what Judeo-Christian values are, or Christianity at large. Jesus said that, talking to Peter, that upon this rock I will found my church, and the gates of hell will not prevail against it. And I used to think I used to think about that image, the gates of hell will not prevail against the church. I used to think about that like, okay, so the demonic forces, the principalities of this world, and basically Satan's kingdom is attacking the church. But then I happen to be listening to Joe Boot, who's really good, a Christian apologist from the Ezra Institute, and he was saying, look, since when is a gate a weapon of offense? No, this is the gates of hell. In other words, the church is on the offense. The church is on the offensive in the culture, in the world, and the gates of hell will not be able to stop the church. So it's a total reversal on, and I think the church, the contemporary church, and conservatism is selling this idea that Christianity is this timid thing that doesn't belong in politics, that should be separate from it. This very separation thing where we have no impact on the culture. Jesus said to be salt and light in the world, to be in the world but not of it. But that doesn't mean that you don't live out your faith. I think that Francis Schaeffer had probably the best perspective on this. And if you want to read a good book, it's called A Christian Manifesto by Francis Schaeffer, a superb book. You can listen to his lectures. He talks about this all the time, that Christ is Lord over all, and that includes every aspect of culture. And Christians should live in that way, that he is Lord. He said in John that be of good cheer, I have overcome the world. So there should not be this timid fear of offending people. Christ spoke about this many times, that we are going to offend people. The world hates us Christians, hates you Christians, because it first hated me. That was Jesus speaking. This is not a timid faith. There is nothing about this that says that you should just live it out timidly and privately and not offend somebody. Look, that there's a way to offend a person properly. Biblically, there is. I mean, that's just the absolute truth. Now, there is a way to do that without being obnoxious and offensive in another way, offensive in a rude, obnoxious, condescending, arrogant way. That is not what I'm talking about. But neither does it mean that you're a timid coward that makes no absolute truth claims. That's another thing about this. The Charlie Kirk conservative idea of faith makes no truth claims. He may say it does, but he does not live like it. He does not talk like it in his public persona. And these other conservatives largely do not either. This is a very privatized thing that shirks from making absolute truth claims about other people's belief systems and worldviews. It is afraid to say, you know what, you're wrong. And yes, I am right. And that's not an arrogant thing. If you know you're right and that they are wrong or somebody else is wrong, you don't just hide that. You don't encourage somebody in being wrong, especially when there's potentially eternal consequences. That's not love. Also this idea of faith that conservatism and the contemporary church is selling us is also an unloving version of faith, because it certainly is not conducive to evangelism in any way. How could it be if you're afraid of making absolute truth claims? In what way does living out a private cowardly faith how is that compatible with Jesus' statement of I am the way, the truth, and the life? No man comes to the Father except by me. We are sinners. I know I am. I'm totally convinced of that. And the only way any of us will be able to stand before God is through Christ, through his righteousness. That's an absolute true statement. It's not a wishy-washy thing. It's not that's true for me, but not true for you. If you're not trusting in Christ, then you're going to stand before God one day and be judged on your own. And it's not going to turn out well for you because nobody is perfect, and that's the standard that we're being held to. I've heard other conservatives talk about, this sort of generalized idea of God. Just, yeah, I believe in God, and it'd be nice if we all returned to our faith. One show I listen to from time to time, the Christopher Scott Show, he had an episode where he was saying just that, and I'm not attacking him. I've emailed him a couple times. He seems like a very nice guy, and I like his show, but to say that and then also admit that, well, I haven't really investigated these things, and I don't really, I haven't had much, basically the way he states it is, I haven't been really keeping up with my spiritual life. But then at the same time, to acknowledge there's a God, faith is absolutely important. You're making true statements, but then acknowledging that you're not in any way, of what importance are they to you if you just acknowledge that, and it's just there and you're doing nothing about it. But then it would be better for America if we all just lived out our faith. Well, what does that even mean? Okay, if you're not developing your spiritual life at all. And again, I'm not trying to be harsh or mean or anything or personal. These aren't private communiques between he and I that I'm revealing. You can go and listen to his episode where he talked about this. So that's one, faith. Second of all, and I'll try to go through these a lot quicker now because I've been rambling. Number two is immigration. We seem to have this idea in America that just unrestrained immigration, conservatives have this idea uh, that unrestrained legal immigration is still okay. As long as it's legal, it's okay. Now, I want to say this carefully because it's very easy, or other people are very adept, I should say, in the culture at mischaracterizing this argument as racism. It is not racism. Tucker Carlson has also made a similar argument in his debate with Cenk Uygur from the Young Turks, and he debated Charlie Kirk. He said the exact same thing. This concept that whether it's legal immigrants or illegal immigrants, I don't care. The idea that you can just let millions of people, or hundreds and hundreds of thousands, yearly or monthly or whatever, into your country, just this open the floodgates, and I don't care if it's legal or illegal. Well, it's better if it's legal, obviously, and illegal the worse. But either way, letting millions of people into your country who don't speak your language, have nothing in common with you culturally, religiously, spiritually, morally, it doesn't matter. If you can go down that checklist and you're letting in millions of people into a country where they don't speak your language, they have a different religious background than you that's completely opposite. It's not like we're Presbyterians and they're Roman Catholics, and we can debate doctrine every Sunday, but still harmonize on Judeo-Christian value. No, let's say Islam and Christianity, diametrically opposed to each other values-wise. Okay, worldview, everything, doesn't even talk about the same God. Islam even denies that Jesus was crucified. Okay, you don't get, they're polar opposites. They have no room for each other scripturally. The Bible condemns Islam. Islam condemns Christianity and denies the resurrection, the crucifixion of Christ. Okay, they're incompatible. So to let millions of people in, let's say, who are Muslims, Islam, straight from the Middle East, don't speak our language, the totally incompatible religion, totally incompatible morals. I mean, the moral values in a truly Islamic country, they don't value women's rights. For the progressives and the liberals, it is mind-boggling that they say, just let all these people in, but then they champion the LGBTQ values and rights, gay rights, women's rights, lesbians' rights, the feminist movement, all these things Islam is opposed to. Islam has a horrible view of women. I mean, it takes two women to equal one man in a court of testimony as far as equality goes. So and women's rights over here are pretty important, aren't they? Gay rights, they're very important in America, aren't they? Well, guess what? Gays get thrown off the roofs in Islamic countries that are run by Sharia law, and the list goes on. Women can't even drive cars. System of government over there is totally different than ours. A lot of them are oligarchies, or they're just outright tyrannical. And over here, we're supposed to be a constitutional republic. Anyway, this argument that I'm putting forth often gets characterized as racism or Islamophobia or as xenophobia or some sort of phobia. I just hate Muslims. No, actually I don't. But I recognize the fact that letting millions of people into a country where these people are totally opposite than the natural born citizens of the country is not a good idea when you're doing it in just mass numbers. And I think it's a very foolish thing. If you look across the ocean, across the pond, as they say, to the UK, there's a perfect example right over there. Look at London, look at Germany, look at Sweden. Excuse me, look at these places where they've let millions of people that were totally opposite than the natural born citizens, and you'll see the destruction that is going on. British citizens right now, I was listening to a show over there called The Big Question, where they talk about cultural topics of importance and social value. They had journalists, pastors, priests, everybody, that politicians, social workers, whatever, up there on this stage. And the topic was, what makes Britishness, or in other words, what is British? What does it mean to be British? They could not answer the question. Douglas Murray, who I like to read, he's a social liberal. He's not a conservative by my standards, because he's yeah. Anyway, he basically he got up to, and finally he had to say, in the past it was the monarchy, English language, our history, the courts, Christianity. But all these things are being swept away. You bring in millions of people who know nothing about the monarchy, it becomes a lot less important, doesn't it? You bring in millions of people who are Muslim into a country like Britain where Christianity is fading, and all of a sudden your religion doesn't mean all that much anymore, does it? Um, the Muslims' main objective is to spread Sharia law wherever they go. So the courts are actually in opposition to these millions of immigrants you just brought in. And I could go on, but in America, another thing that's really inhibiting this whole process is the point of view of the immigrant. When immigrants came to this country 50, 60, 70, 80 years ago, the Irish, the Italians, Germans, Polish people, whatever, all the people I've talked to, at least, have told me that the first thing that fathers told their children was, okay, let's say it's an Italian family. Okay, we're not Italian anymore. We're Americans. We're going to learn the English language, and we're going to learn about the history of this country. Those were the two things that immigrants did right off the bat. They learned the language and they learned the history of the country, because this was now their country and that history was now their history. You don't see that anymore. The immigrants I run into, really, I mean, some of them learn English, but there are entire communities of immigrants that do not learn the English language. They huddle together in these communities. You can go to New York, for example. You have Little Italy over here with Chinatown over here and Little Korea over there. And that's what's happening over in Europe. They're not assimilating. They're just bunching up in groups, little Afghanistan, little Pakistan, here, there. So London isn't a cohesive, unified city by any standards, but it is rather a group, it is rather sectioned off tribes now, all living together in compartments, basically not interacting with each other unless they absolutely have to. And New York is a perfect example too. The Hasidic Jewish community there is same thing. Not that I'm against people that are ethnically the same or culturally the same, wanting to live together, but if you do that, at the same time assimilate, learn the language, learn the history of the country. when the history of our country starts not being taught in the schools, not valued, that we don't know what anchored us, we don't know what brought us to where we are today. And if immigrants don't learn this, then they don't learn the value of America to begin with. So they're coming to a country just with this idea of just endless riches. We've arrived in the promised land, but they have no idea why it's the promised land. They have no idea what'll keep it the promised land. None of those things mean anything. It's just this blank check, basically, is how the world looks at it. 150 million people want to come here every day, or 150 million people right now want to come here. I read that statistic somewhere. Even if that's not true, millions upon millions upon millions of people want to come here right now. And very few of them know anything about the country actually, but rather they just see it as the land of opportunity. Not a bad thing, but if that's the entire picture, then there's a problem. And that's the entire picture for a lot of immigrants. Not all of them, a lot of them. And when you have a lot of people like that coming in, you have no hope of actually continuing the values and the civic institutions and civic foundation that made the country what it was to begin with. And then when you have kooks out there who want to make the country more and more anarchic or libertarian, it's a recipe for disaster. Um, Finally, I want to end this with going back kind of to my first point of a Christianity that is not absolute. Here is an inconvenient truth that a lot of people don't like to think of. It's the name of a Francis Schaeffer book, and speaking of God, He is there and He is not silent. So we know that God has spoken. We have His Word, the Bible. Christianity it's you cannot separate Christianity from the 66 books of God's inspired Word. You can't. You can't pick and choose or cherry pick certain verses that you like and remove ones that make you feel uncomfortable. It's either all inspired, basically, or it's not. Scholars debate certain things here and there, but generally speaking, it's accepted. Historically, scholars, whatever, in the church, Orthodox Church, those 66 books constitute the Word of God. So it would behoove us to pay attention to what is in it. And what is in it is actually not a bunch of relativistic statements about how we might live or how it would be convenient if we just found the time to live this way. Or, maybe every Sunday, every once in a while, we could stumble in, pick up a guitar, scream into a microphone, and feel the presence of God. No, none of those things are true. God has spoken. He's given us His Word. There was a reason for it. It was not an arbitrary thing that He spoke and gave us His Word. And what is in His Word are absolute true statements about Himself, about His plan of salvation, the condition of man, that we are all sinners. This is objective truth. It is not just a subjective thing like I'm a sinner and you're not. And hey, that's the truth, man. No, we are all sinners. I challenge anyone to convince me that they're not a sinner. I mean, no, we all know that we are. It's just a question of what you do with that. And that's where we come to another true statement. No man comes to the Father except by me. Most conservatives, by and large, the Matt Walshes, the Charlie Kirks, do not talk about that. They try to separate their conservatism from absolute statements like that. They talk about a generic God. He's the Christian God, but nothing about Him is absolute or concrete or foundational. Nothing about it is controversial or offensive or challenges the person next to them or makes them uncomfortable, but rather it's a fuzzy God who just, he's the American God, the red-blooded, patriotic, Republican God. Such a God does not exist, certainly not in the Bible. God is not a Republican, nor is He a conservative, nor does He take most interest in most of the political controversies that we see in our social media feeds on Twitter. Most of that stuff is irrelevant hogwash, especially in the grand scheme of God's plan. But to call ourselves conservatives, it would behoove us to actually know upon that which conservatism is founded, and then to actually stick to the foundation, which is the Bible. And then if you crack open the Bible every once in a while, blow the dust off its cover, put down the Edmund Burke books on conservatism, and go to the actual source. Forget about Pat Buchanan for about 5 minutes, and you'll see that actually there is a wisdom far beyond anything that you will find in a Charlie Kirk speech. There are final, absolute statements in there for how we should live and how we shouldn't, and they are not socially liberal statements. They are not libertarian statements. There are statements about what is right and what is sin and what is not sin and what is sin and what you should do about sin and how you should not harbor it or humor it or just try not to offend people. It is not, again, it is not a loving thing to see your neighbor in sin and at least not say something about it. Now, if you tell somebody, well, you're living in sin, you're doing something that's sinful, it's wrong, there's a God who will judge you one day, and they give you the bird or punch you in the face, well, at least you tried, you did your thing, you talk to them about it. You tried. Even in the Bible, it says at that point, shake off the dust of your feet, of this town. But you should live your life always as an example of what a Christian should look like. And in doing that, again, it is not a wishy-washy, timid, personal thing. It is a bold living out of faith. Do we all live by that perfectly? Absolutely not. I don't either. But it is something that we should be striving for. Evangelism, again, is not a timid thing. It is a bold thing. Francis Schaeffer has written so much on this, and I would encourage people to really actually read. Start with a Christian manifesto, and then The God Who Is There. He is there, he is not, isn't silent is another one. How Then Shall We Live? I just watched that documentary that he put together. You can watch it on YouTube. It's called How Then Shall We Live. It's a history of how humanism really brought down the church throughout the years. But these are three inconvenient facts that nobody likes to talk about anymore, and that absent these three realities, what we call conservatism really isn't conservatism. It's just social liberalism, and it's going to have the same effect on the country as progressivism. It's just a slower road into hell, basically. Anyway, that was the episode for the week. I hope you enjoy it. I don't usually say this, but go on to iTunes and leave a comment or a review. It helps the podcast reach a broader audience. But once I hit 100 episodes, I plan on doing some actual networking and advertising and that kind of stuff, and try to ramp things up a bit. I just have so much going on right now, and 70 episodes really isn't all that much, so I'm still feeling out what direction I want to go with this and all that kind of stuff. I'm in no huge hurry. I just enjoy doing this. Anyway, good night and God be with you.